Well, let's tell this story with a little bit of the sacred story here as we come to Hinduism, and a little bit of repetition. But what have we already discovered what a Hindu is, which therefore becomes the definition of Hinduism. What is a Hindu? Person from India.
Person from India.
And so when they ask that question, I'm a person from India. The political structure is equivalent to the sacred structure. If you live in India, you usually would consider yourself a Hindu. If you're a Hindu, you usually consider yourself a person that lives in India. The two have tremendous affinity. It's not a perfect affinity, but it's a dominating affinity. So that becomes, and the word itself means the country, India, in Persian. And so Persia is right pretty well, a couple of countries away across Pakistan. And so it's an intriguing name. Both of them were in the British Empire, and there's a lot of weaving going on, and the Brits are the ones that gave them the name. And so Hinduism is technically only as old as the British Empire. And what it really means is accepting and respecting the ancient traditions of India, such as what you just read, the Rig Veda coming in from some of the Vedas. So this would be the Rig Veda. And so you've now had an opportunity of sensing the sacred literature of India. And it also means accepting and respecting the tradition of this social class structure, which we call what?
Caste system?
The caste system. Now, how much love do we have in the room over the Indian caste system? Kate's given me, at least one person's given me some verbal. Now why aren't you happy with the Indian caste system as you...
Oh, it just doesn't seem that great. I mean, I don't know that much about it, but
Okay.
it seems kind of bad.
Yeah.
And then try and keep people separated and stuck where they're at, or maybe not stuck, but just being, I don't know.
Okay. So to be a Hindu means to respect the caste system, even though they have outlawed the caste system. And so the government, I believe it's in the last 20 years, has outlawed the formal imposition of the caste system in Indian society. But do you think they've had a lot of success of diminishing something that's been around for 5 or 6 or 10,000 years? I mean, how do you want to? Not a lot. And so we're going to begin sensing why the caste system is linked to the religious systems, which is linked to that word Lynette likes, karma, and how karma weaves into all of this. So the caste system is very much a part of it. But the special part of the caste system are those at the highest level, and that's the Brahmins. You might want to get today is the day you might want to get your vocabulary beside you, so that as you're seeing words, because Brahmin is one of the most confusing. You will see Brahmin, it'll drive you nuts. And so you might want to keep that one somewhere near you. If you don't have one, there's extra copies on the table. And so the Brahmin, that's your first, in this setting, first exposure to that word, and get ready, the confusion will begin quickly. But basically that's your priestly caste, those that are in the priestly caste, that is their title. Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Now, when we come to our understanding of Hinduism, we first need to get on the table that there's no founders to Hinduism. Now, how does that compare to a religion you know about? Do you know a religion, and do you know the founder of that religion?
Islam and Muhammad?
Islam, Muhammad. And so Islam would be considered a founder of Islam. Is there some others?
LDS and Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith is the founder of the LDS. Excellent.
Mary Baker Rady and
Mary Baker Eddy.
Sorry, Christian Science.
Christian Science, founder. Right? And so religions often are associated with their founders. Christianity, Judaism. Yeah, we have a few you can pick from. Abraham you could use as a founder, but Abraham is confusing because how many religions did he found? I'm going to finish my question just before we get on. How many religions did Abraham found? More. Three, at least.
Yeah.
Which religions did Abraham found? According to just the tradition. Judaism.
You could even say Mormonism, because if
You can go to 4. Yeah, you can easily go to 4. But let's start with Judaism. He also was could be considered a founder of Christianity, and he's also a founder of Islam. Okay, all 3. And so he is a busy boy when it comes to how many religions can you. The original, where the splits all started, was with Abraham. We formally say that the Hebrew nation in the Hebrew world was Moses, and the Jewish faith was Ezra. And so, Judaism has a few founders that you can sort of weave into their narrative as you try and understand them. And so, is that sort of sense? It's pretty routine to have a founder attached to the faith that's grown out of it. Hinduism doesn't have a founder. There's little emphasis on these kinds of historical persons or events. Why? What does history mean, and what have we discovered already about Hinduism? History means
linear.
History means linear. Cyclical means I don't care about the past. You're working in yearly cycles of which are being relived every year. And when you have a story of Krishna, it's as if Krishna was alive in your midst again. And you tell the story of the ancient story of Krishna the charioteer. And when you tell it around the campfire, you literally bring them alive again. And so the beauty of the festivals that we'll discover in Hinduism is it rebirths all of these interesting folks from their mythological past. So they're not in the past, they're right here. Today's the festival give it a name, it launches the festival, it comes alive, and away you go. And so the cyclical nature doesn't need history to tell the story. The story is always in its midst. So you don't need the historical person as if 2,000 years ago Abraham was, actually he's 2000 BCE. And so, but even the Krishna's knife, I brought the Bhagavad Gita here today, and that's Krishna's story. They don't really care about, when he was 2, he did that, and when he was 10, he did this, and when he was 30, he did that, and he died at age 60. I don't even know anything about Krishna's formal historical life. I've just never memorized anything of it. I could give you all those features of every founder we've talked about, but I have no data in my head when it comes to Krishna's life. It's just a historical story. And so there's just no interest in it that we have. The great gods and the great kings, the gods, the heroes, they're all important within Hindu thought, but they're important as far as models of eternal truth. It's teaching you something about humanity. It's teaching you how to live. And so, yes, they were a past story, but we're going to tell them around the campfire again, so they become alive, and they're going to teach us something from each story. And so when you take a moment and you relive the Aditi story, whenever I think of Aditi, one of my classmates' name was Aditi. So at USC. So I think of her every time I read this story. I think of Aditi in my classroom, but it's always the wrong one. But that's my problem. And so when you read this, we think we've just read something from an ancient past. But if we can get our heads in thinking like a Hindu, we just relived it. Now, what day would you tell this story? There's a day you'd tell this story.
Day one?
Day one. Why?
Because it's the beginning.
It's the beginning. So you read your creation hymns on the first day of your new year, because you're reliving the story again. And the story is read, and the story is alive in your midst. There's a perception here that's wonderful of what the reality of stories are. They really do bring alive. It's why we, in so many ways, we enjoy dropping into our novels, because we become engaged into our novels, and it's like we're living a really good novel. We're just there in the story. Time changes when you're in the midst of a good story. Well, we've known that from time immemorial. When a story is told, you become a partner in the story. But their heads are ready for this, so that they're in the story of creation. And they're relearning their number system. And they're relearning this, and they're trying to discover. So, was there an eternal truth in this? How about our religion is complex? Sure.
I wanted to interject, although there's not like a specific founder of Hinduism, the writers of the stories, and they're not, say, revered like the founders of these other religions. They're the rishis, and they did write the Vedas down. Doesn't necessarily mean that they created the religion so much, but it is their stories that created the religion.
Yeah, they're honored. They're honored for their contribution. And so the challenge becomes when someone contextualized in India reads a narrative like this, they're seeking the truth of the narrative. They're seeking something about the importance of women giving birth, and how important birthing is. And so knowing that every woman in the midst might have the opportunity of giving birth, they're retelling that story, and the women recognize the importance of birthing. Do you see how a sage could then talk about the birthing process and how important it is for birthing to happen again this coming year? That could be an eternal truth that you'd want to say over and over as you read this hymn. And there's some there's some negativity in there too. I mean, you could take your eternal truth however you wanted to take it. The dilemma when you're historical is you read the story of Adam and Eve, and you fight over whether they were real or not. I don't know if any of you have been in those kinds of settings, but when a historical, contextualized person reads their history, they think this happened in year one, and this happened at 2 o'clock on year one, and Adam is his real name, and Eve is her real name, and we need to read this like it's a historical transcript of a historical event. Well, your context, historicity, causes you to think like that. And you will read it like that. And you will fight over whether there was a real person named Adam and a real person named Eve. And they had 2 children. And that first child killed the second one. And the dilemma is when you study the Hebrew, you learn that Hadam means man. So when the hymn was being written, they were talking about a man and a woman. And you know that there was greater thought than reading something historical. And so it's intriguing to be retrained on how to read a text. If you're historical, you are going to read it differently than if you're cyclical. It's just part of that process. So this is real sacred history. This is the sages hearing and transmitting these stories over and over and over again until the community knows it's important enough to write down. And then it's written down into these texts, so it can be told over and over, and they're protecting it from the fires and from the wars and the things that destroy literature. And so the sages take that. But these events also transcend history, which again is that, so don't get bogged down. What you learn about in reading is there's many layers to how you read a book. You read it literally, which is typically how a historical person reads a text. You read it literally. You read it figuratively. You read it with a revelatory, that it means something in the future. Or you can read it with a metaphorical. And so those are four classic ways that you can read any text. But you've got to be alerted that there's many ways to hear the story. You can take it literal, and a child would take this story as literal. But you would hope that someone who has moved through their life a little more, when they heard this story, would take it metaphorically or poetically, or that they just enjoy the story at a different level that transcends the mere literal or historical reading. And that's just a wisdom that you get if someone cues you on how to hear literature and the ancient literature. Any comments on that? How do you read? Isn't that an intriguing way of thinking? Just how do you read a book? Wow. That's one of the best books to ever give a college kid. The title is How to Read a Book. It takes the student through every department of the university and explains to them that every department of the university reads differently, and they read texts differently. It's one of the most important books a college kid could ever receive. It's called How to Read a Book. So if you ever want to pick up an intriguing book, pick up How to Read a Book, because it's the same idea here. Different reasons for reading engage text differently, so that English reads different than biology. And you better cue a college kid that that's coming at them, because it's really hard on them if they don't get cued on that, which most don't. They just have to discover it by going from a sociology class to an English class to a biology class, and they can't understand a dang thing. Kate, you're giving me some affirmation.
Yeah, just being a biology person, definitely. I've been reading scientific literature for at work, and it's like I had to learn that skill. It's a lot different than reading anything else I've ever read.
Good.
So, yeah.
And as writers, is how to write a book, and we write completely differently, okay, because we come from a different, and we're looking at our audience and who is going to read it. And so I might, write a humorous kind of passage for a newspaper or a local paper, or write a children's book with lots of pictures, and it just depends on who's going to pick it up. And so that's, and then this guy writes for another totally different audience.
And Mark's got a book that he's just published, or how recently did you publish it?
June.
So a brand new one on really an intriguing way of rethinking healing and healthcare. So it's a great text, and so he'll please get something on the board as to it, how do students pick up a copy of it. So give us
Bring some next week.
Bring some next week. That's always great too. Okay. So, and yet we drop from our mythological, and I use that term kindly. Mythological shouldn't mean untrue.
Right.
Mythological should mean eternally true. Okay? Mythological means truth for eternity, even though it can be viewed as a story that you wonder if it actually historically happened. That shouldn't defeat your reading of it, but it should inform you how to read it. Mark?
Can I digress and ask
Sure.
about the caste? Is the Hindu faith, do they look at each individual as being equal, or does the caste system separate people as far as equality is concerned?
It will separate them. And it will separate them cleanly and dramatically. And so value-wise, you have a value in each level of the caste system. So if you have a higher value in society, if you are a Brahmin class than a serf class, a peasant class.
So comparing that to the Western, you know, from Islam to Christianity, it's everybody's equal, right?
No, we have a huge class system, and if you think of America as a Christian country, we have three, instead of four, we have three. So we have poor people, we have middle class people, and we have rich people. Those are three castes.
Yeah, no, but I'm not talking about from a political or from a demographic point of view, from a religious point of view, from Christianity or from Islam. Is the intent of Christianity is?
I'm going to come off a bit on my answer to you, just to think about it, because when you're in a caste,
I agree with you there. I agree with you, but I'm asking more on the religious.
when you're in a caste, there's no expectation you're going to move caste. Therefore, it's almost meaningless to value a different caste. You have what you have. And if your next door neighbor is a different caste, then they have a different caste. It's not like value comes from the ability to acquire. And you have no ability to acquire another caste. Therefore, there really isn't, from a personal point of view, there is no value because it's not attainable. So I'm going to pull off my valuation. When we, the Western eyes, look at India, we see value. We see a top-class priestly with a tremendous amount of attributes. We see a really rough lower class, and we'll talk about those actual castes themselves in a minute. I'm going to come back to castes. But your question, I answered it from a Western perspective. I think if I were in the society, I wouldn't value it differently. You just got what you got. It's like, you know, I got a soccer ball, I got a green soccer ball, and you got a blue soccer ball, or a blue foot, or you know, a blue ball. It's just what you got.
Well, I think because I'm working on this on a personal level with my practice and everything else on the difference between an individual's value and, let's say, their IQ or their socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
Because I don't care what you say, somebody who's a billionaire is worth more.
That's right.
And gets more power, gets more respect, even though it's off. They have more value from an economic point of view. On a spiritual level, I believe we're all equal value-wise.
But if I could be a billionaire, it has more value to me because I have a desire to be that. If I have no desire, then it's like, you're a billionaire, you know, get on with life. So if there is a context of how you're coming to that question, even economic value, that I think that the society of necessity has to diminish, the Indian society.
Well, and there's no mobility. I mean, you're born into a caste and you die in that caste. And so, and it doesn't necessarily mean all Brahmins are rich. Like Ramakrishna, he was a poor Brahmin.
Yes.
And
Not about monetary.
Yeah.
I'm separating
Yeah.
the monetary from a value perspective.
But where they do value it, they know that the Brahmins can attain enlightenment. And the more conservative Hindus would say, you can't attain enlightenment unless you're a Brahmin. Okay? But then you have to say, well, how do I get to a Brahmin? If I'm an American, I get my little wheels going and I start running up the corporate ladder trying to be the top priest so I could get enlightenment. Well, you can't do that because what you have to do is live your life that has been assigned to you and live it well so that you attain good karma, and the good karma will now, upon, we're going to come back to reincarnation or rebirth, you come back to a higher caste level. That's how you move in Indian society, is you move on rebirth. And that's the movement. So you have to be reborn as a Brahmin to achieve enlightenment in the most conservative structures of Hinduism. And so living that well is good karma. Getting frustrated, marrying out of your caste, all bad karma. All bad karma. The family goes nuts. Because there's bad karma everywhere.
Messes up everybody.
I'm getting ahead of myself. But you can see how each one of these ideas are going to be interlinked. So let's go back to these folks that helped us with that. We've learned a bit about the Indus Valley people. They're agriculturalists. They peaked in 2500 BCE. Everyone's comfortable, I'm sure, with the nomenclature instead of BC, which is Christian. Before Christ was its origin. BCE is before Common Era, which is the same year as Christ's birth. But anyway, you try and deconstruct our number system a little bit by adding BCE to it. And 2500 is around the time of Abraham. We typically use Abraham as between 2500 and 2000. We typically put Moses in 1500. I'm just using Hebrew lineage. We put David at 1000. We put Ezra at 500. We put Jesus at 0, even though there wasn't a 0 there, which is the problem on the count. But anyway. But we're just saying, so we're thinking the very beginning of Hebrew literature, which is the Abraham story, as really the peak of Hindu society, going back at least 2,500 years before this, as this society was developing. So there's a tremendous amount of material coming out of that time. They already had a system of writing, and so you're catching bits of it here. They had cities with water, bathrooms, and covered sewers. Think of Middle Ages, European society. They didn't have any of these. Their water was crud, and it gave them disease. They didn't have bathrooms, and they didn't have covered sewers. I mean, there were primitive ones, but nothing as sophisticated as they had in 2500 BCE in Hindu societies. So just a sense of a people that were extraordinarily strong. Their religious journey was a reverence for water. Makes sense. Water is they're dependent on. The fertility of Mother Earth makes sense. They're agriculturalists. And male creative powers. So you get male domination there, but that's it's one of the things to sort of begin watching is we didn't know. We have to sort of what didn't we know before the modern era? One of the things we didn't know before the modern era was that a woman did anything more than provide a space, a cavity for the next generation. We thought that's all women did, was provide a womb. We thought that the male seed was equivalent to the farmer's seed, that created everything necessary for the human being that was going to be created. And so the seed was the total package. The womb was just the home for a few months. Now that was the way humanity looked at creative powers up until genetics, when we all of a sudden began to realize the woman has as good a contribution into the next coming generation as the male did. Well, that was utterly revolutionary in how we perceived the creative powers. So for time immemorial, the male was the dominant agent of delivering the next generation to the womb. And if the womb wasn't a good womb and the woman was infertile, woe to the woman. She wasn't doing her job, which is to provide a fertile ground, like all seed needs to be placed into ground. Can you understand how those metaphors of agriculture would have defined the male and female reproductive systems and would have driven the power of the male over the woman? Right now there's a power structure here, folks. The male is now dominating the woman because the male is providing everything necessary for the next generation. You see that? Now, as soon as we change the genetics, the whole power structure of our society changed too, where the woman is now an equal partner in the next generation. That revolution is in our lifetimes. Prior to that, you're seeing the dominance of the male on the expectation that they're doing all the work. Okay? Everyone got their head around that one? That's a really important one.
I wonder how far back that goes, because who was getting blamed at King Henry VIII? He blamed the women for not providing a son.
That's right. There was absolutely no conception
He did not.
that it was him that would have been the problem.
Yeah.
No
So that's
conception.
reversed, 'cause so earlier it was only the men provided whatever and everything was met. And then it comes along to this point, and then all of a sudden it's your fault because, or it's the woman's fault because she's having daughters or not any babies at all. And really,
Okay, so just a bit of perceptual on why, and all the ancient literature, women read these ancient texts, and it's so frustrating to them because they're clear male domination in the way that these texts are constructed. But here's the reason. It's the male creative powers. He's the one doing all the heavy lifting when it comes to that delivery of seed. Okay. Now, certainly, they all recognize the value of women, the nurturing of women, the caring and development of women in the lives of every child. That's every human culture has obviously known that. But when it comes to procreation, there's the male had the creative powers. Okay, does that all make sense, Dale? Might frustrate you, but doesn't make sense.
It sure was a little bit weird though when the baby looks more like the mom than the dad, That would be a really fun,
The religion was very sacrificial, and so the question then is, what do you sacrifice? Abraham's story teaches us something about sacrificial. The point of the Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac story, in Muslim literature it's Ishmael that Abraham takes up the mountain. In Hebrew literature it's Isaac that goes up the mountain, and his dad's gonna kill him for sacrifice, and the ram is caught in the thorns, and Abraham is able to grab the ram and throw it on the altar and kill the ram instead of his son. That's clearly a cultural shift from human sacrifice to animal sacrifice. That is clearly a cultural shift of an excuse for the Hebrew people not to have to sacrifice their children, which everybody around them would have been doing. And so you have to ask at this stage, what gets sacrificed? And what are you trying to say? When the Spanish arrived in the Inca villages, they were seeing humans being sacrificed daily, because the perception was, if a human was not sacrificed, the sun would not come up. They were a cyclical culture. They had done from time immemorial, they had sacrificed a human so the sun would come up. So they kept the tradition alive. And it was only until someone came along and said, sorry, but it comes up anyway, even if you don't sacrifice somebody. But they had to learn that the hard way, as to how do you stop your sacrificial systems when you believe it's absolutely essential to your... So you have to begin, when you're looking at the religions, what are you sacrificing and when are those shifts taking place? And so then come along the Aryans, which poor Kathy was trying to sort out. How do we get to the Aryans, and is this one of those neo-white rallies that I've all of a sudden walked into? No, the Aryans are the names of the noble ones. And the noble ones, as we talked about, are coming in from southern Russia. The Aryans are eastward, Indo-Europeans, coming in around 1500 CE. So now we're well into BC. Gotta be BC.
BCE.
Yeah.
Gotta be BC. That's a mistake. Can't be C. So, sorry. Talk about giving heartburn. Okay, who we discovered was 1500 BCE. Hebrew nation. Who?
Abraham?
Abraham was 2,000 to 2,500.
Moses?
Moses. What did Moses do?
Took his people out of Egypt.
Took his people out of Egypt. Where?
Egypt.
Well,
Oh, took him to where?
To the. What's the story?
the desert
In the desert until he could take them,
into Israel.
which was called the Promised Land. And so isn't this an interesting story of pretty close to the same time? Here we have pastoralists coming out of southern Russia, called the Aryans. They have an oral knowledge religion of the Vedas, which are eternal, timeless truths. The oldest is the Rig Veda, which you read tonight. And they worship of the gods by sacrifice, petition, and praise. Humans are partners with gods in the creative process. There's a shift. Okay. Partnership. Now that's a different shift. We'd learned that the Indus Valley people really seemed to have a hierarchical structure. But the male was pretty important in that structure. So the creative process, instead of just being dominated by the males, was now a partnership with the gods that they're bringing with them. This is almost identical to Jewish thought, modern Jewish thought, that humanity is a partner with God. It's not language you see in Christianity, but you do see it in Judaism. The merger created what we now know as Hinduism. And we should all go, this never happens in humanity. What happens when a migratory people come rushing across the mountain passes, sees a wonderful fertile valley, and brings all their people in? Think Moses' story. What happened?
Wars.
Wars. What was the result of the war? They cleaned out the place. The Moses story is they cleaned out the place. They didn't leave anything of the previous societies. What's this story? A merger. Now this is mythology, folks. This is taking some. These are people coming in and taking over somebody's farm. There's going to be fighting. But the dominant story that's come through the ages is Hinduism is from the merger of these two people, not the crushing of one people over another, not the imposition of one idea system over another idea system. It's a merger story, and it's really an intriguing story. It's different than most other stories. I can't think of one other one that's a merger story. So Hinduism brings this intriguing idea of mergers together to reform a story. And so then I'm asking that question, why is this so different? Okay, and so what did this oral religion meeting the priestly, probably with a writing system, they were all interweaving these, what did they create? And so now it's that search for the one reality. Why? Think politics. Why are they searching for one reality?
Political system?
They need a political system that does what?
Unite.
That is one reality. So they're using the most powerful language of their day, religious, sacred language, to achieve a political unity. And so their religious objective is the same as their political objective. It's to achieve one reality. When we look at American, we talked about the melting pot. When we talk religiously, what was the real truth? When a Baptist walked into a Puritan village, what happened in the 1600s?
Probably got converted.
He either got converted to Puritan doctrine, or he was sent where?
Exile.
He was exiled to what area? How's your American history here?
Siberia. No, that's the
Rhode Island
Rhode Island.
is the place that the Baptists were shoved over to, so that Rhode Island became the Baptist colony in the Pure. I'll do some lectures on the history of denominations in America, and it's just sort of this wide-eyed experience because all your history has been stripped of the religious connotations of American history because you're in public schools typically. And so what was Maryland known as? What was its religion? We know what was Massachusetts was. It was Puritan. We know what Rhode Island was. It was Baptist. What was Maryland? No, opposite. Catholic. It was the Catholic enclave. What was Pennsylvania? William Penn. You should know this one.
That would be Protestant.
It would be which one? Quaker. So the Quakers were sent into Pennsylvania. They only felt comfortable if they were in a land that was their religious community. And woe to you if you walk down the road the wrong way. You'd get a whipping. And so that was the structure. And so the Constitution is trying to break that. And so when you now reread the Constitution with that in mind, you had unique religious identity in all the different states. And the Constitution is trying to weave this one reality out of all these diverse religious states. All of them using their tax dollars to pay for the pastors and the churches. Why is the church in the middle of every town on the East Coast? It was central to that community's development. And it was one church in the middle of each of those communities. And so that was the church. That was where your taxes went to. So there was an amazing rupturing of church and state in America. Why? Because they were woven before that. And they had to break that. So here we have that similar political opportunity of creating one reality. And so to do that, you need one literature. And so the Rig Veda becomes a dominating literature into that. And that was followed by the Brahmanans. There's your next Brahman kind of project. The Brahmanans, which are our sacrificial manuals, which teach us how we're to worship well. And that was followed by the Upanishads. And that was new ideas about the sacred reality. The previous generation decided they'd come up with something different. But they're all searching for the center of all this, the unified one. Why? Because they're constantly trying to create political unity. Because this is a political religion. And so this one in the new life of all the gods, the reality who encompasses all the world. So that's what they're searching for. Why? Because they're continually struggling to get political unity of all their villages. And they're using their religious language to interweave them. It is so fascinating to place this against American religious story. Okay? Now there's our first name, Purusha. Purusha is sort of in the English, the gigantic person. But that's really the name for the whole universe. Okay, so Purusha is this name that we have, and so that I think that is a picture of Purusha, but you just never know. Now, what does this tell you about the political happenings? There's a political and a religious story here in the symbolism. What are you reading in that narrative that tells us about the religious perceptions?
There is one body.
One.
You can have how many faces?
Look at all the faces.
Yeah.
But one body is still one body.
Still one body.
And
So
have
the
all
oneness
arms, but
accepts
one
what? It isn't all one in that sense of uniformity. It's really oneness through diversity, isn't it? It's oneness through diversity. And here you see within Indian society, the diversity of the faces, the diversity of the arms, still one lower torso and a multiplicity of upper torsos. Now the upper torso here is the head. And we're going to discover pretty quick that the caste system is designed like a body. So what's the head? The Brahmins, okay? So the Brahmins are the head, and there's a multiplicity of Brahmins. Therefore, there's a multiplicity of ways to achieve the ultimate goals. So there's going to be an acceptance of any number of ways to achieve that. And what's this going down here? What's this?
Worshippers down there.
Yeah,
And they're guys.
they're guys. Yeah. They're all guys in this narrative. All have beards on. All aesthetic in their posturing.
Four of them are praying. I don't know if that guy on the right is praying too, or is he like trying to communicate? I mean, he's got his hand out,
On
but
there.
Yeah, work the symbols. Have fun with it.
And there's the same amount of faces as there are worshipers.
And that number is
5.
5. So 5 is important. Okay. Yeah. Isn't that fun?
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So
everything the God is holding there is a symbol of something. You have
That's
like a
right.
bow and an arrow and
That's right.
other things there.
yeah. Now, how many total arms? Okay.
I mean,
8 is always the number of new creation. You see 8, it's a new creation. 7 is perfection of creation. 8 is the next number. It's the starting again of the cycle. It's the 7 plus 1. We've now started the cycle of it. It's new creation. So there's a rebirth in the new creation. And so 8 is always indicative of that. Okay. So the last hymn, Purusha, was sacrificed for the universe to come into being. Well, that isn't just what I read. This Aditi thing gave me a hymn on how what's this going on? Yeah, we got 1,000 villages, folks. We got to weave them all in, and they all had stories. And so you're going to get that sense as you're reading these stories that this is a weaving process of a tapestry that looks really funky when you finish it, because it's got these multiplicity of heads pointing in different directions, but it's all one head as one reality. And that's just trying to teach you about Indian religion. Okay. The hymn includes the social order. Okay, so your hymns, your ancient literature includes the social order. What's the social order? What have we called it? The caste system. So what have we discovered? And that's part of the universe created in the primordial sacrifice. Okay? I wonder if this is the fire by the Ganges. There's a family that has kept the fire going by the Ganges, that when you come to the Ganges, you always come to this family so that you can have the fire lit. What is really intriguing is the family that keeps it going, which would be one of the most amazing symbols you would do in your journey. Everyone is supposed to bathe in the Ganges. These are untouchables. The ones that keep the fire going are untouchables. We'll talk about them in a minute. You need to take a break?
Get some water.
There we go. So let me take a break right after I finish this out.
Yeah, the Greeks also have the ladies to keep the fire going.
Yes,
The-
those are
the
important.
virgins.
Those are multi-generational roles. So there's 4 levels in the caste system of India. The mouth of Purusha are the Brahmins, the ones that speak, the mouth. The arms, the strength, the protectors,
Soldiers.
the warriors. The thighs, ones that keep the economy going. And the feet are your serfs, your servants, your peasants. And where's the one that keeps the fire going? The untouchables are the dirt under the feet of the social system. They aren't even considered part of the caste system. They're the untouchables, literally. So I'd like to make the argument that American society is 4 castes. I'd like to argue that you have your indigent caste. I'd like to argue that you have your poor caste. I'd like to argue that you have your middle class caste. And I'd like to argue that you have your elites. Let me try and prove this. Can someone tell me the name of the school of the elites in Washington, D.C., because it's going to be all over your news. So you need to know this. It's already hit the news a couple times. A school you've never heard of. But it was the school that Judge Kavanaugh went to. What was its name?
Oh, I
It
know.
was his high school.
It was a prep school, wasn't it?
It was called Georgetown Prep.
Yes.
I promise you, none of you have ever heard of Georgetown Prep. Why? Because the educational opportunities for American elites are schools we have never heard of. So we don't even have a chance to go to Georgetown Prep, I promise you, because we're not elites. No matter how smart you are, you will never get into Georgetown Prep unless your family is an elite family of American society.
I'll agree with you there. I scored in the 98th percentile. I was not admitted to MIT. I was not admitted to these fancy private schools. I went to U of I, you know. And, you know, intelligence cannot open the doors.
So if you don't even have the chance of getting that
Okay,
education,
but-
how would you ever become an elite in American society?
Because, it's relative to what your goal is, number one, or what your potential is.
Okay.
And then at the same time, if you're born into this elite status, which a lot of people are, that naturally have a higher IQ, naturally have obviously a different demographic and more opportunity, it's complete BS when you look at the amount of people that have that potential with IQ, that become addicted, that do illegal things, that have as much virtue as an indigent. And so the focus, if your focus is just on that one aspect, then your argument becomes somewhat solid.
But let me try and prove my argument down another trail. Economic. How does each part of our caste system, America, handle $1,000? Okay? What does an indigent do with $1,000?
If you gave the $1,000
Why?
to somebody on the street.
They will spend it. If you gave $1,000 to an indigent person on a Portland street, what's going to happen really quickly?
Food and shelter and drugs.
You're talking about capitalism, though. You're not talking
But
about.
just how we use our money is going to define where we are going to be in American society.
Yeah.
So they're going to spend it as fast as they can because it's going to get stolen. So they better get rid of it. How will the poor use it? How will those in poverty? And I'm saying now that are making less than $30,000, less than $20,000. How will the poor of American society give them $1,000? What will they do with it?
Pay some bills.
Yeah, buy things they need.
They're gonna spend it too, but at least it'll be on things they need.
Yes.
Okay? Middle class, how will they spend $1,000 you've just given them?
We'll save some. And
Yeah.
No, they're totally different.
I'm gonna spend it on something that I want.
They're more likely, but what will you spend, but what will a lot of the middle class do with that $1,000?
Experience, drugs.
They could.
Transportation.
They used to, let me sort of say, they used to be a higher savings. So they put it in savings, they put it in a business, they do something so that the money would begin doing something for them.
Investing, right, yeah.
It would give something back to them. So it would be an investment of some sort. Even if it's paying down bills, it's because they're trying to do something with it. How would the elite deal with that $1,000?
They invested.
They'd invest it. And they'd know which stocks to make it into $10,000 in a year. It's my point of saying the way we've been trained on how to use our money, and each caste of America trains their kids on how to use the money. And so we train our kids. It's almost impossible to break out of your caste in American society, is my argument. It's foolishness to say you can rise up to be president of the United States if you don't go to Yale. The likelihood of you being president of the United States if you don't go to Yale is one out of a Trump. I mean, Trump made it. But precious few do. If you do, you're certainly not going to get in the Supreme Court unless you were graduated from law school of Yale or Harvard.
But I can agree with you on that, on a debate level, that
Sure.
to transcend those castes, from an economic point of view, is ridiculous to put into somebody's head that you can do anything and that Pollyanna type of stuff. On a level of enlightenment, on a level of virtue, I think different though. I think somebody who is born in the indigent or the poor status has the ability to have the virtue and the peace and the opportunity to heal just as well as the elite or the middle class.
There's basic human dynamics. You're a human being, so you will have capacity as a human being. But if you were in the elite, you'll have vastly better doctors. There's no doubt about it, than the middle class, let alone are indigent. Oh my goodness, when you're sick and you're indigent. So healthcare at the indigent level is vastly different than the elite level in our communities. And so I'm trying to just sort of say, I think the Indians, they weren't too far wrong, even though it makes us just queasy to think about it. I'm trying to prove that this is almost a human dynamic and not an Indian dynamic.
How do we learn to act on what we know to be common sense? And I think this is what's driving me nuts in working with some of our indigent people. And I don't mean indigent, but people that have had addictions, and we all have a certain level of that. My dad got after me on the phone and saying, you know better than to eat bread. You know it's going to cause you to have inflammation. You couldn't walk last week. It's just like you being a drug addict. You have no sense what in the world. You have no common sense, and you're not acting on what you know to be true and to be right. And I thought, yeah, that's right, I'm going to just eat that anyway, just because I want to see if, and it's not, it's going to cause a problem, and still you do it. And, when we read our, the biblical thing on when Paul says, I don't know why I do what I do when I know it's not good, and I go ahead, and this is paraphrase, but, I cannot seem to help myself. I know what I need to do, and yet I do the opposite of what I do. What is causing that? When we can learn, I think that is enlightenment.
And that's what I believe anybody can transcend. I'm totally against the gurus, everybody saying that you can do anything, type of like the president stuff, or everybody should be a millionaire. It's like, to me, it's gaggy, and it's misleading, because the reality is that we can't. There's only so much money to go around for everybody, and if we're all economic equals, we probably have about $30,000 or $60,000 each person from India to Idaho, and after 15 years or maybe 5 years, then we could redistribute it the way it is right now. And so there is an argument to what you're saying, that inherently there are slaves, inherently there are a middle class, and inherently there are, and I think you can't ignore IQ, because people with higher IQ tend to be the elite, tend to be the people that are in control of things and financially in control, and have more self-control with morals and virtues. So it's fascinating, and at the same time, I truly believe that for somebody who's addicted, that's an indigent, they have the ability to overcome that addiction.
Now let me pull off my argument.
Go ahead.
I would argue that in each caste, there is a small percentage, somewhere around 10%, that have the capacity to jump castes. And America's gift was to give that to everybody. But in the reality of it, only about 10% can do it. On the streets of Portland, we used to go into these rooms with 300 indigent people, and I would purposely ask folks, how many can we help?
Right.
And they would go, 10%. The rest want to be there. They want to be on the streets. But about 10% are ready to move, get off the streets and move into the working poor, knowing how difficult that is. Of the working poor, how many enjoy being there? A lot. How many will jump? Of the middle class, how many will move into the elite? It's a low number in each one. But it is a number. And what it takes are writers like you that will give that 10% the spark it takes to change their economy, to change their addictions, to change those things that are literally binding them to their caste. And if they can free themselves, then they can jump.
See, this is my argument back to you though, because I believe it's 20%. I think there's an 80-20 rule. I think if you give, the fact is if you give 100 people the lottery, 80% are going to give it back. 20% are going to know what to do and manage it and not blow it on drugs and giving it away or whatever. 80% of people don't have their finances in order to retire. 80% of people are on either addicted or on a pharmaceutical or sick. And so those 20%, I believe, are using that internal model and going against the germ theory that the bug or these external things, my demographics, my IQ, my environment is what's affecting me and I'm stuck here. And my thought, and I in my years in practice is that those 20% of people that don't adopt the germ theory model can transcend from the indigent to the poor, to the middle class, to the elite, because they're not buying into it. And it's not anything that's constraining them except how they're looking at the world.
The thing is that the poor people have an easier, or have a better chance of getting into enlightenment than rich people do. That's true.
That's true.
And that's when, I mean, aside from the example of Buddha, who came from wealthy, and he's sort of an extreme example there, but people, and I have relatives who are poor and whatnot, and I find out that they're more tuned in to reality than most middle class people are, because they're struggling from day to day, and so they're very aware of what's going on around them, of how the world works. They're, their eyes are open. They don't have some vision or dream in front of their reality. They're seeing reality as it is.
Yeah, and that's, I agree with you wholeheartedly, because what happens is when the focus is the money, which is external, then the enlightenment and the virtue side of things just gets overshadowed.
Well, there's a lot of bad karma. The more money that passes through your hands, the more bad karma there is, because all the money is tainted.
So I want you to now make a transition from the American way of I need to move from my caste that I'm at to a higher caste so that I can have advantages of the higher caste, to the Hindu model of that doesn't work. You're just not going to move, so let's just lock them in. But we'll change the way you think about what's going to happen. So, as an illustration, Mother Teresa comes into Calcutta and she's walking down the street, and there's a dirt poor untouchable on the side of the street, and she realizes he's got a disease that she could help him, and she comes down and she helps this guy, and she gets him up and she takes him to her home, and she feeds him and she takes care of him. And as she's picking this person up, the Hindu looking at it saying, "Why are you doing that? You're only making it worse." Now, what's the difference between Mother Teresa's perception and the Hindu going, "Don't do that"? Why is the Hindu saying, "Don't do that"?
Because that's right where they're supposed to be.
They're where they should be, and if they're fortunate, what will happen? They'll die soon, and if they've lived a good life, they'll come back as a servant. Okay? And then when they're the servant and they've done a really good job of being a good servant, then how are they going to come back? And then they could be, and they're going to die quick when they're in caste 2, the warrior, so that's good news. And they'll die with, valor and da-da-da-da-da, and they'll run into battle and da-da-da-da-da, and they die. Yahoo! Because now I can come back as a... Do you see how it works? They don't need one life to live it out, and they just got to run through life and get it all done. So there's patience.
So on your argument, the question is, are all people equal? on a value point of view, not on a caste point of view, but on a value point of view.
I think you have to use that principle as a driving principle of Western culture, and I'll use it's a bad term, but so of European American
Okay,
culture.
let's
It's a
call
driving
it-
principle of that has
Political
driven
statement.
through to the United Nations
It's
Charter.
a Christian
That yes, we're
view
equal, but it's
under
also
God.
it's
We're all
also
equal.
religious,
That's what
and
it
it's
is.
driven
Really.
best
Yeah.
religiously.
Yeah.
And it has been a religious. And Hinduism was very much a part of it. Christianity was crucial to driving the equality into European and American society.
So the only part of the caste that can attain perfection would be the highest level then, on the Hindus?
Those that live their life well are living it perfectly.
So even if you're,
There's your definition.
Yeah. Any-
Those that are living life as it was designed to live are living life perfectly. Not God, which is the poorest definition of perfection. So do you get a sense of how there's patience? That patience is in the system to sort of say, don't fight this. You can make moves and you can achieve any goal you want. Just be patient and do your duty. And your duty is crucial to the Hindu lifestyle. And so this is why when a woman marries out of her caste, the horror runs through the entire village, because you're throwing bad stuff everywhere, which will instantly learn as karma. So, but you've got to know that, and you inside of you should know that. That should be part of your internal being. You should know that inside of you. I can't impose that on you. You should know that, and that expectation of knowledge is all part of this. That's within you. Now, if you don't know that, then you haven't dug into it deep enough. So start digging, because that should be there. I think let's see how far this one goes, because this is
This is my
the
favorite
karma.
cartoon ever. I love this one.
Okay.
It's my favorite
Definition
cartoon.
of karma symbolically, which is wonderful.
I love that. My favorite cartoon.
Okay, it sort of tells us what's about, it speaks volumes, doesn't it? Because karma is all part of this whole conversation. And karma is really what you're saying in a different way. That the virtues, your virtue language that you're using, is the Hindu way of trying to create the virtues, and karma is the way of creating those virtues. We see the virtues differently within Greek philosophy, the way they built it, but you can see wonderful virtue theory within Indian philosophy here. So there's knowledge and there's speculation. And so those hymns that we've been laying out for you, those stories of a people, those eternal truths they're trying to tell their kids. So you have the Upanishads and the Brahmanans and the Vedic hymns, and that's the Vedas. And that's what is heard. And there's an emphasis on hearing. American culture and European culture have focused on what you can see. Our Bible is what I could see, and I learn from visualization. Hindu society is what can you hear? What are you hearing? And there's a different form of knowledge from the auditory that is really intriguing to this ancient religion. Sound while saying is more important than words said. How should I say something? Really? You're a really nice person. Thank you for being here. You're a really, really nice person. Great. Thank you for being here. You sense what's happening here? You don't believe it the first time I said it, because the sound makes no sense. The volume, the style, the tones of the words. The words were identical both times. But we would much rather have the second way that it comes, because that makes the words true. The sound made those same words true, and we knew that. And so the ancient cultures had a much richer way of interpreting words because they were oral cultures. These were mostly poor folks, and most of them couldn't read. So the oral was their transmitted language. There was, obviously, the priests could read. There was some reading happening. The merchants could do their number systems, so the economy could function. But primarily, these are oral cultures listening to the stories, interpreting the stories and what is happening. And that's a different kind of culture than us with our book and bibliographies and biblical learnings and reading this stuff and trying to learn virtue through the words. Whereas the virtue is probably more in the sounds that I made than in the words I said. And so these older cultures that are oral in their transmission are very attuned to this and know that that's the way of doing it. And so the early concern was these repeated deaths. We talked about that, the cyclical view. Being born in a world is a result of dying in another life. This is the wheel of existence. And now there's a new word you're going to want to lock in on, and it's samsara. So samsara is that word you're going to what you want to understand. And this is the cyclical downward spiral of existence. People...
I'm sorry,
Scott?
just real quick, I don't want to get into debate with it, but in the Hindu view of samsara and reincarnation, can you step down? Or can you only stay at that level and reincarnate up if you've done your holy?
The problem that the Hindu religion is going to try and solve is the dominant perception that vastly everyone goes down. The American positive psychology is that we must be going up with these reincarnations, and let's all jump into these lives because we're going to be reincarnated and it's got to be better, because that's very American.
Okay.
That's just our psychology. The Indian perception is life is terrible, life is hard, life is tough. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. I will never achieve perfection. And I am going down on this problem. So this cycle of life is not a pretty picture where we all stand and sing Kumbaya on the top of the mountain. This is a horror story, folks, that we need our religion to solve. Because I screwed up a lot in this life. My karma has been horrible. I've been sending out vibes. I want to kill everybody. But you are going a downward.
Thank you.
So you might have been a Brahmin, but now you're a dun 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 dun.
But on the other hand, even if you're born as an untouchable, you're incredibly fortunate, because just to get an incarnation as a human being is a great, amazing, wonderful thing, because you get the chance. Now you have the chance to do your thing, to progress. And so you don't look down at your station, because once you're in a human, you're like, oh, you're so much better off than you could have been.
And so there's the moral power. The moral power is the knowledge that if I do well, I will have the opportunity of coming back at a better station. So your moral power is now, what is the virtuous life I must live so that I can achieve a better next life? Now that carries with it that which you have now is being transmitted as well, and what is most important about you will be transmitted into the next, into the next life that you are a part of, and so there's a transmission. It isn't just death and rebirth. It's a transmission of what is most important in you, is also going forward. So those wonderful things you've learned are also moving into the next life that you're a part of. So that when you're a servant and you've lived a good life and you've learned how to be a good servant, when you are a merchant, you have an uncanny memory of those servant goodness to you. And so the virtues are being assumed to be transmitted. It's not a blank slate. What's different on virtue theory within the Hindu society is it's not a blank slate. It comes to you as a result of your past goodness that you can build on, which was Socrates' premise. Socrates, I would argue, was a Hindu because that's his understanding of the virtues. Your virtues come from past lives, and you have to build on that. You look inside of you. It's amazing if you study Hinduism to then study Greek philosophy. You go, wow, yeah, this is Hindu stuff. And I know you're studying that type of philosophy. So this is intriguing. So that makes karma so important. Every action has an effect. Every good thing you've done has a good effect all around you. Every bad thing you do has a bad effect all around you. So karma becomes this wonderful moral wheel of energy and vibrancy within the Indian way of thinking. What one does causes consequences to happen. Actions in previous life that I'm born again into, existence miserable, happy. So that you get this continuity of I'm a human. I must have lived. Wherever I was, it must have been wonderful. I did something great. God, I need to carry that on, and I need to do better. See the moral power of that. Now, and so the interesting part is I've been studying Buddhist reincarnation, because the question last week is really, I think, Buddhism is different, and it is. When it comes to reincarnation and rebirth, Buddhism, especially American Buddhism, has an American, I can get it done in one life. Okay, so Buddhism has transmitted into sort of the American psyche, so that you have what are in essence 10 phases that you could participate in, and it could be as horrible as a hell being and as wonderful as an enlightened one, and all of those are within you at the same time. And however you live, however your karma is flowing, you can sort of attain that existence in this life. But I've been all week I've been digging into the Buddha's thought and whether he thought that, or whether that's an American Buddhism transformation, because we're dealing with people that only think they live one life, and we've got to sort of present that in a way that makes sense to them. So that's my struggle with Buddhism and its understanding of rebirth and reincarnation. So your Jains and your Hindus, we're very much into Hinduism now. Buddhism is going to make some shifts, and it's going to make some shifts on this area. And the other shift it's going to make is that migration of stuff. We would typically, in the religions of the book, call that a soul. That's the soul moving to the next being, and whereas we have no soul theory within Buddhism. So it's hard to know what's getting transmitted within Buddhism of what we're talking about right now. So the no self, it's more your creativity, it's more your spark, it's more those things that Buddhists are trying to sort out as to what moves, because all the Buddhist traditions have that sense of reincarnation to them. And you see that particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, where they're running around looking for the Lama, who's a reincarnation of the Lama that died. And so there's a wonderful sense of reincarnation, but they've had to modify a bunch of stuff trying to make it work. Anyway, so there's your first instinct on karma, bad karma, samsara, the wheel of existence. It's now. Are we okay? Okay.
Talk about an American transference of the word samsara. When we were just newly married, I had one of the most beautiful bottles of perfume that I wore every day. And we don't use perfumes a lot anymore. But it was called Samsara. And I wore that every day. And it was one of the most incredibly beautiful Indian type spices. I know it wasn't made over there because who would wear that? Who would wear that? Nobody. No.
Okay. So there must be a better way. Hindus want to be free of this cycle of life. Americans think it's wonderful. Let me jump into it and take me on the path. How does yoga influence karma? Sorry, we haven't said yoga hardly at all today. Now it's time. Now it's time. How does yoga influence karma? Because karma is going to influence samsara, and samsara is going to... So how does yoga do this? What's it do to karma?
You'd have to say it's a positive effect of being
Yeah.
gentle.
Yeah, I want to say like it's a good thing. It's gotta make your karma better.
Okay?
I guess. But I'm also a yoga teacher, so.
So it's posturing that should allow for good karma. Now, what is the good karma?
Energy flowing.
Energy
Right
flowing.
direction.
Yeah.
Mindset.
Mindset. Introspection.
Yeah.
Okay. So because if you assume that what you're doing is creating good karma, you want to do it, right? That's assumed in the whole conversation. So yoga must, and yoga is the dominating methodology of India for their spiritual lives, linked to meditation. So it is by definition good karma. Does that make sense? So it's really, really important.
So it's inherent, just like praying, it's like.
That's right. Praying must be good karma in the language we're using.
So it changes how we behave outwardly, hopefully, to other people.
It should.
It should.
Yeah.
Not just all about ourselves, but it should change our actions eventually, or, within.
And I would hope you'd see that most in community. When you have a community practicing yoga, you should see good community. You should see good outcomes. You should see good relationships coming out of that practice, because that's its point, is to create a good individual who then functions well in society, flowing good karma, because good karma is just building good community. That's what its point is. And good community creates good nations, and we talked about that with the Chinese. So yoga is the pivot point of how this can be happening, but it's very strange because it seems so extraordinarily individual. But when you see the yoga community, you see an awful lot of this benefit. True? Okay?
Yeah.
That's why people are there. It's good karma, by definition. Okay? It creates that.
I wonder if that's why I tend to envision people from India as very, very happy people. They're into, a lot of bright colors, they do a lot of, they just seem to be very, very happy when you see any kind of, and it doesn't matter how dirty the streets are or whatever, but when they do the documentaries, they just seem to be, people trying to be happy and be peaceful. They're not, feisty.
So does this last question help wrap up? We're trying to illustrate the spirituality of yoga. Has our conversation successfully led us to that reality that yoga is really important to this? We've been talking about creating unity politically. Somehow yoga is the key element in providing that political unity, which should come from a good person in a good community, in a good city, in a good nation. And that's why it's such an intriguing practice. Such an intriguing practice. And mysterious now. I trust the practice of yoga is vastly more mysterious now as to what it's accomplishing in the people that are enjoying it. Because there's a whole lot wrapped up into this. Okay. Any final comments? Any takeaway messages? Okay. This week, try and create good karma. Okay. Now that we've got a definition that's just on the table, how do I do that? How can I create good karma? And in any moral development, you have to do it purposefully first. Just purposely. This week, try and create good karma. And I would say, The next person you meet, try and create good karma. Because if we go out of here saying, "Oh, I'll be nice to everybody," probably won't be nice to anybody. But if you say, as soon as I go out this door, the next person I meet, I'm going to try and create good karma with them. Okay? Just so when you're trying to develop moral pathways of improvement, it's important that you give yourself a realistic objective. And so try and do that.